All right. So I'm just going to have for the record now is that the Gezerah Shava shows that the law applies when it repeats it twice, that division occurs both in the private and public domain. But the problem is whenever it uses vague words like the word carcass is his, what does his refer to? We learned this in the pit. The carcass is his. Is it the damager or the damaged party? Do you know what I'm saying? So the thing of it is that does feel kind of irritating. This is what Michael was feeling irritated about many times, is that lack of specificity. You come to learn deeper meanings, but at the same token, if you're getting a list of instructions, it would be nice to have a clear list of instructions. I actually get that. I get where Arthur's coming from. In other words, tell me, carcass belongs to the damager or the damaged, using the word his in two different opinions, and he interprets it like this, and they interpret it like that, can feel like a bit of a frustrating process. Am I right, Arthur?
Yeah.
Okay. So, so the thing of it is I did show you a source where we had this very, very argument. And what source did I show you guys? Do you remember? In what daf? Guys.
Early, one of the early dafs.
Yes,
13b3.
It was 13b3.
Oh, 13, okay.
Dealt with this issue about talking about the damager, and if two partners own property together in a joint field, how do you interpret it, before or after the comma? And you've got two different Tanaic approaches there. Does that make sense? So this does cause a certain amount of issue. So I said to Rabbi Cohen, I sent him a message, and I'm going to play the message for you because Arthur does have a point, but also the point is that it has to use the term it shall divide, and I'll show you where it's superfluous. Okay, so Arthur's got a point, but the Gemara's also got a point. Let me just show you. So this is what I said to Rabbi Cohen. I sent him a verse, and I said, I've got a bit of an issue. Tell me if you can hear this through my speakers.
Okay.
Hi, Rabbi Cohen, in Pasha Mishpatim, chapter 21, verse 35. It states, if one's man's ox shall strike his fellow's ox which dies, they shall sell the living ox and divide its money, and the carcass too they shall divide. So the question that Arthur asked is, well, what happens to the carcass of the ox that has been attacked? Do they divide the proceeds there? Because the person that is being attacked, his ox is being attacked, can't profit from the transaction of damage. Because, for example, when we learn in terms of Muad, we say that you shall surely play an ox in the place of an ox, and the carcass shall be his. The carcass is whose? Is it the person that has been damaged, or the damager? Because if it's the person that's damaged, he's keeping the carcass and he's getting paid a replacement ox, which means he's profiting out of the deal. So does the does the dead ox go to the person that had the attacking ox, and then he just replaces the value from choice property of his killed ox with a living ox, or that value, and he gets to keep the dead carcass, or does the victim get to keep the dead carcass and then profit out of the deal? So I just don't know, even in the case of Tam, what it means with regard to, and the carcass shall they divide. Does it say, for example, that both the person who owns the attacking ox and the person whose ox has been killed and attacked, they take the carcass of the ox that has been killed and split the proceeds, and then also divide the proceeds of the attacking ox that is now you paying half payment damages on the damage for the killed ox, as well as the gufa from the attacking ox. You know, it's also vague.
How's it, Damon? Sorry for the delay.
Okay, before I play Rabbi Cohen's answer, could you hear that audio clearly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fine. I want to share the verse just to give a memory refresher to you guys, if that's okay, to explain the various issues that I picked up. I said that Arthur picked up all these issues. I picked up some, and Arthur picked up all. But now, at least Rabbi Cohen thinks Arthur's a Talmud Chochem, which is great.
Which he is.
Well, at least one
Which he
person in the
is.
group is. Damon, maybe you'll get there one day.
Yeah. Gavin, you
He's
also
good.
there.
So, Arthur, it's those niggles. I get it. On a serious note, Arthur, I get those niggles.
Niguns.
So let me just share the screen.
Damon, the whole thing was similar to what I asked about the ambiguity of the way these things are worded.
Absolutely, it is ambiguous, Kevin. And you and Arthur.
It's not specific, yeah.
And Devin's addressed this too, and Marco and me. So let me tell you the 3 or 4 ways you can interpret this. If one's man's ox shall strike his fellow's ox which dies. Okay. Now, at this point, it deals with an ox where one ox kills another ox. It still hasn't addressed what happens if it injures it and doesn't kill the ox. Does that make sense? This is only addressing a fatality of one ox killing another. That's the first issue. Second issue, they shall sell the living ox and divide its money. Fine. So I understand, at least by saying that the victim's ox has died, it clarifies whose living ox is surviving, the attacking ox. That makes sense. And divide its money. So fine, they then divide the money of the living ox. Okay, so we are saying then, and this is where there's a contradiction. Let me just tell you where there's the first contradiction that I picked up. We learned before the following. We learned the following, that what happens is there's 2 leniencies. Leniency number 1 is that you pay half payment damages, right? Half payment on the dead ox. The ox that's either injured or dead. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Half payment on the dead ox, the ox that was attacked.
Yeah, so let's not talk about an ox that survives and has injuries. Let's just say that the ox was a functional ox worth 300 zuz and now it's dead. You pay half the payment damages. This is what we learned in the Gemara up until now. Fine. So the first leniency for Tam is that there's an argument between Rava and Abaya about what becomes a Muad. Abaya says it's after 2 times it becomes Muad, and Abaya says after 3 times it becomes Muad. But be that as it may, at this stage, Tam. And then what happens here is your second leniency is on the gufa of the attacking animal, the surviving animal. So if the ox is worth 300 zuz, it's now dead, and now you give 150 zuz because it's a tam, your second leniency is we have to sell the living ox. And that living ox is worth, if it's worth 150 or more zuz, we give to the capacity of half payment, which is 150 zuz. If the ox is a puny ox, and it's only worth 120 zuz, we give to the capacity of half the amount with deductions made for the value of the living attacking ox. So then in that case, we'd give 120 zuz. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
That's what we learned so far. This is the confusing issue that comes up. If you say they shall sell the living ox and divide its money, what's that implying? That if the living ox is now worth 120 zuz, what, the guy only gets 60 zuz? Do you get the question? It's a bit vague.
Yeah, it is a problem.
So then the second question, and the carcass too they shall divide. So now we've already said you sell the living ox. So is it the carcass? Is it the carcass of the ox that was killed, or do you sell the living ox to kill it and then divide it? Because you're mentioning the word, and they shall divide twice. So if you're learning according to Rav Yeshua, that it teaches the laws of a Gezerah Shabbat to be not divergent, meaning the public and private domain, that for Keren Tam it's worth the same, half payment damages, that you owe either way. I understand why it uses the word divide twice. I get that. But the problem is on the normal explanation, if the living ox has to be killed, right? In order that you use its value, then how does a living ox ever become muad if you kill it after the first event? And the reason why that would be confusing is very, very simple, is that we learn that you pay from choice property initially on any muad or cash equivalent. But we learn that you pay on the gufa of the living ox. So do you sell the living ox and then share the carcass too when you, because if that's the case, you're repeating yourself. You've sold the living ox, it's now a carcass, and then you split the money. You already said you split the money. So is that to learn the law of divergence, that there's no divergency in the public or private domain? Or are we saying that you sell the living ox and the ox is still living, but you get a value for the living ox as a working horse ox, which is worth more than a dead ox? And then in that particular case, you split the money, because it seems in divide its money, and then the carcass too they shall divide. In other words, the dead carcass of the attacked animal you divide. So now the person that's done the attacking, his animal, he's profiting from the deal, because he's getting half the money, it would seem, from the carcass of the killed animal. Does that make sense of all these questions of vagueness?
Yeah.
So to me, that it made sense that Arthur had some questions on it. It made a lot of sense. So we've got to, what's going to happen is Rabbi Cohen did mention in his audio, which I'll play now, that we have got a verse that deals, not a verse, a whole chapter that deals with Keren, where we're going to clear up all these issues. But in the meantime, I want to play Rabbi Cohen's thing for Arthur. Arthur, you ready?
Yeah, listening.
How's it, Damon? Sorry for the delay in getting back to you. Just not often by my phone. So it's an excellent question, and you're going to see that the Damon is going to deal with it later. So the bottom line is as follows. You can take a certain degree of damage, a certain value of damage was caused, and that value of damage, if it was caused by a tam, half of that needs to be paid by the aggressor to the victim. And in principle, you're going to learn that he can pay with cash. He can also pay with any type of movables. And in the scenario where he's going to pay with real estate, then he has to pay with the high quality real estate. But in principle, again, the aggressor can pay with anything that's worth value. Those are the background again. He's only going to pay according to the degree of damage, and he's only going to pay if it's a tam that caused the damage. He's only going to pay half. So in principle, again, even if you're going to say that, so let's say the original animal was worth 100, and the carcass is worth 20, so the damage is 40. So the damage is then 40. So now either the victim can keep the carcass. So again, sorry, I said the original animal was the original animal was 100. The carcass is worth 20. So the total damage is 80. The liability is 40. So either you can say that the victim keeps the carcass, so he's got a 20, and then the damage needed to be paid is again 80, and then the aggressor pays 40 out of his pocket, right? Or you're going to say that the aggressor is going to get the carcass, but then he's going to have to compensate. He's going to have to compensate the victim for the carcass, because then the victim is not out suffering a loss of 80, he's suffering a loss of 100. So again, the bottom line is that the amount of damage is always decided based upon how much value was lost. And so the Gemara is going to discuss again who's going to keep the carcass. As a general rule, the victim will keep the carcass if the carcass has got value, because even if we were going to tell the aggressor to take the carcass, he would be able to use that carcass as part of his payment to the victim. Okay, I hope that clarifies it a little.
Okay, guys. So what we're learning here is a couple of different principles. The first thing of it, Arthur, is that when you read it literally, you can't make head or tail of it, unfortunately. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing of it is that we learned in a previous daf. Do you remember where we said that you pay from choice property? We're talking about a muad here. And the guy says, well, what if he doesn't have choice property? What if he only has barley? What happens if the barley isn't? Well, then you must pay from the highest quality barley. Well, what if you don't have high quality barley? Remember that whole daf that we went through?
Yeah.
So the thing of it is, one of the things we went through in that daf is that about the guardian that looked after an animal that he had to take a shavua, an oath, and that was ripped apart by wolves and everything else. We learned that at the end of the day, what happens is that there is an opinion that he can pay with that whatever is worth that equivalent damage worth. So let me just explain to you what I'm saying. If you're going to give property, the reason why we say on choice property with muad is so that it's easily sellable. But a person doesn't always have high quality property. That's number one. Then we also learned a second principle. That second principle that it wasn't the damager's job to go and convert that item into cash. Do you remember? That was the surprise. Is that he's saying, listen, I'll pay you, but you sell it on Gumtree. It's not my problem. As long as I'm giving you the value, that's fine. That's your thing. I paid you restitution, but I'm not running around having to sell it. Kevin? Kevin, are you with me? So in other words, the issue with the carcass is as follows. You've got a living workhorse ox. This is what Rabbi Cohen's saying. And that living workhorse ox that's ploughing the field is worth 100 zuz while it's alive. My ox kills your ox. Now, you've got a dead carcass that's worth 20 zuz on the butchery market. It's dead. My ox killed your ox, right? It's worth 20. So what is the shortfall of damage? I owe you another 80 zuz. Okay? So if you turn around and complain to me, Arthur, and say, listen, you owe me 100 zuz and keep the carcass, I can pay you with anything, as long as it's worth that value. So I'm going to give the carcass back to you. We learned that in the previous stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say to you, listen, pal, you got 20, you got the carcass. I only have to make restitution on the 80. But since it's tam, since it's the first three events, I only give you half of that, which is 40 zuz. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Which is a little bit different to what we learned before. Because the confusing part of it is we learned before something a little bit different. What we learned before is that, say there's 100 zuz worth of damage, right? 100 zuz worth of damage. Then what would happen is that I would owe you 50 zuz, have to sell from the attacking ox, and based on the attacking ox worth of value, pay you that half payment. And if my attacking ox was worth less money, then I'd pay you up to that. So we haven't hit the chapter yet. We haven't hit the chapter. I'm not sure if Rabbi Cohen knows at the point in which I did tell him the daf, I sent him the daf, but I don't know if he knows exactly offhand from memory. He's got a lot going on where we are. But so far, all we've learned is that two leniencies, half payment damages with the gufa of the attacking animal. So the calculation comes off different to the calculation he's given. The calculation he's given to me makes a lot more sense, actually, the latest one. So I think that's how the Gemara actually comes out to learn it. Now, it would make sense on another basis, is that you have to sell the attacking ox, because if you don't have money to pay, that attacking ox is worth value. But if that's your only asset, and it's a tam animal, you sell to the value of that attacking ox. That's what you pay. Because it's the first 3 times it's a tame animal. It's what you call first occurrences events, meaning that you get certain leniencies. Does that make sense? But you don't always have to sell that animal where they shecht it and kill it. Otherwise, you'd never have a case, which Gavin brought quite correctly early on, where a tam could become a muad. Why? Because if you kill it, how does it ever become a muad? So where you don't have to kill it, you might sell it to another person, not to a butchery, to be able to become a workhorse animal and get more money. Does that make sense? And the second one inherits this problem. And you get money, and then you split the proceeds. You give the proceeds on that, of what the damage is. But when it uses the word divide and divide, it's a very confusing topic. So I thought what you had to say made a lot of sense. Let's see. Okay. I didn't claim to have the chukhmah for myself. Okay. All right, just one question. I just want to go through one or two halachas quickly. In terms of taking off tefillin on Rosh Chodesh, today's Rosh Chodesh. So this is from the Mishnah Brura, chapter 25, verse 59, and from the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, chapter 10, verse 19, and from the Revivot Ephraim on section 7, okay? This is where it's from. Now, I want to just go through something with you. So in terms of when to remove tefillin on Rosh Chodesh, it has to be removed before Musaf. Okay? So Arth, what you do here is you daven Shachrit, and there's a special Musaf for Rosh Chodesh when there's a new month. So before Musaf, you actually take off your tefillin. Yeah, Kev?
Because you have to say the Ashrei with the second Ashrei, which you have to touch the tefillin before Musaf, at the end of Shachrit, towards the end of Shachrit. That's why you only take it off after that Ashrei, that second Ashrei with the
That's correct. That's exactly why you keep it on until that period, and you take it off obviously on Musaf. One of the reasons that you take it off is that what happens with Rosh Chodesh is it's like a quasi. It's not really a Yom Tov, but it's got like a certain status, like just like you've got art for Shavuot and Pesach and Sukkot, you've got Ya'aleh v'Yavo. You've got certain prayers that you say for festivities and things like that. You have to say, and you've got Musaf for those festivals. Rosh Chodesh is seen in terms of a way of a festival. Some people never used to work on Rosh Chodesh. Does that make sense? So generally, people also don't wear tefillin on Yom Tov. So Musaf, I mean, there's a clear definition of the difference between the Chol, a weekday, and that quasi Yom Tov sort of feeling. So let me just read what it says here. One of the reasons is based off the Musaf liturgy. In Nusach Safad and Nusach Chedot HaMizrach, so that's that's generally used amongst Sephardim in Israel today. The Musaf Kedusha opens with the words Kete Yitnu Lecha, you will be crowned, referring to the teaching that the Jewish people, along with the angels, crown God as King of the world. It's explained that it would be unbecoming to crown God as King of the world while one is wearing tefillin, as tefillin are considered to be one's own personal crown. Another reason that tefillin are removed before Musaf, applicable even to those who do not recite Kete Litnu Lecha as part of the Musaf Kedusha, is to add a Yom Tov flavor to the day, which is what I mentioned now. It was just a guess. As the Musaf prayer represents the Yom Tov nature of Rosh Chodesh, the tefillin are removed at that time in order to recall that tefillin are not worn on Yom Tov. In fact, some authorities recommend removing the tefillin before the tefillah Torah reading, as it also represents the Yom Tov nature of the day. There are even those that recommend removing the tefillin before Hallel for the same reason. Others suggest removing the tefillin after the Torah is returned to the Aron HaKodesh, for the reason Kevin mentioned, which makes sense also. Nevertheless, the halacha is not in accordance with any of these views, and the tefillin are removed before Musaf. And that reason, I think, is exactly what Kevin said. That although it's nice to have that feeling, the reality is there's some practical issues. Although the approach described is fairly common and based on Kabbalistic considerations, there is reason to suggest that it might not be the ideal manner in which to conduct oneself. So according to a number of authorities, the tefillin should be removed while reciting Uva Letzion, just before the beginning of the Yehiratzon paragraph. So there are other sources that seem to indicate that tefillin should be removed after obviously after completing Uva and not while reciting it, but before the Kaddish is recited. Indeed, this approach is consistent with other occasions when there's some form of interruption before Musaf. For example, in most congregations, the rabbi delivers the Shabbat morning drosha before the pre-Musaf Kaddish is recited, and in this way, Musaf can and should begin immediately after the Kaddish with no interruptions. I just thought that they did that before the brocha so that everybody would come back and listen. All right, before leaving the tefillin exposed and unwrapped for the duration of Musaf, which is unbecoming to the reverence owed to them. In fact, according to halacha, when one removes tefillin, one is to wrap and put away the shel rosh even before removing the shel yad. There does not seem to be any good reason why this halacha should be ignored on Rosh Chodesh. Wrapping the tefillin during the repetition of Musaf or during the Kaddish before Musaf, for that matter, is also not an option, as one is required to listen and respond attentively to the right portions of the Musaf Amida. So obviously the common practice forces then that tefillin to be left unwrapped and exposed for an extended period of time. So there, I'm nearly done, guys, don't worry. Therefore, it appears to this writer that the ideal procedure for removing tefillin on Rosh Chodesh would be to remove, wrap, and put away the tefillin before the Kaddish is recited. This was the practice of Rav Yosef Soloveitchik and Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. Once everybody has put away their tefillin, the Kaddish can be recited, and the entire congregation can begin Musaf together in unison without any interruption. Okay? So that makes sense, is that basically they do it before Musaf so that all your alainus have been said, etc., and that everybody can focus on doing the Amidah and repeating the Amidah. That's correct.
Did you say alainus?
Not the alainus, I meant the...
yeah.
Sorry, Kev, you know what I meant.
No. The things after Ashrei.
I meant Ashrei, yeah. One who is in a congregation where the custom is to leave the tefillin unwrapped until after Musaf is permitted to deviate from the congregational practice and to properly put away his tefillin before beginning the silent Musaf. For a number of reasons that are beyond the scope of this chapter, there's no problem of law tidchul dedu with doing so. I think that means you could go with the general custom. So if you've got your own unique custom, you can do it as long as you don't disturb other people. What's your question, Kev?
I think most people like to put it away before doing Musaf. Wrap them up and put them in the bag. I think most people actually do that. They don't. But most people actually do that anyway. But some people start Musaf while people are wrapping. It's some people.
Yeah, so I think Kevin's brought up a good point. The problem is that the person that is the Shalech Tzibur can be a little insensitive, and he just starts Musaf while people are wrapping up their tefillin, which isn't fair. He should give people a few moments to wrap their tefillin up. So if you forget, you shouldn't disturb your Musaf. That's what it's also saying. If you forgot to wrap it. Because that's only a custom, it's a minhag. And interrupting Shmona Esrei is forbidden by halacha. Okay? And it's actually it's in the Mishnah Berurah, chapter 25, verse 61, that you shouldn't interrupt your musaf, which is halachic as opposed to minhag, a custom. All right, guys, I think we've addressed the issue. We will go through Kiddush Levana Bli Neder Gavin tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks, Dan.